Hello and welcome to the Common Creative Podcast. My name's Chris Meredith.
And my name is Paul Fairweather. And Chris and I are on a mission to open up the conversation about creativity in life and business through the lens of ideas, stories, visual communication, and for today's guest, I would add connection.
Connection, yes. Our guest, Megan Forward, is an author, creator, I would say kind of passionate campaigner in a very kind of humble way for the environment and the interconnectedness of everything, of science, of nature, and giving us all the power and tools to use creativity to connect us with nature. I think that's what she does.
Yeah, no, look, it's really, as I said, I thought we were going to be talking about watercolouring. Megan is an illustrator and an author of kids' books, and she's also a teacher and a presenter. I've known Megan for many, many years, and I do love her books. But it was really what was behind the motivation to do her first book where she wrote and illustrated it. But there was so many different levels of layers in there, Chris, about, that whole thing of words and pictures going together and the creativity behind that, which, we've talked about, and both of you are, both of us are, very passionate about that as well. So it was really eye-opening. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, ditto. Let's get her in.
Megan Forward, welcome to the Common Creative Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Megan, it's great to meet you. I know you and Paul go back a long way, know a lot about each other. But perhaps you could kick us off by telling us a bit about yours. Give us a 60-second potted history. How did you get to where you are today?
Okay, I'll give it a go. So when I was young, I absolutely loved picture books. I loved text and image, and I don't think that's changed my whole life. I made picture books as a child, and I still have some. My darling mother kept them for me, and I still have them. And when I go into schools, honestly, they're the kids' favourite books, the ones I made at their age. Yes, I love the format of the text and the image, I think. And what I love is that the text is not necessarily illustrating the image, it runs alongside it. To me, the most successful books do that. I loved Beatrix Potter and just the detail in her stories, in the illustrations that put you exactly in that spot with that particular teapot and that cup and that bowl. I just loved it. Elizabeth Gilbert said specificity is the soul of narrative, and I think that people like Beatrix Potter really got that in their illustrations as well. So I'm really charmed by that. And I just love that she became an environmentalist in her later years. I found that out more recently. So I think I just love the medium of the picture book. I think that in seemingly simple ways, the text and image can convey great complexity and depth, but I think it's subtle and it's an art to be able to do that well.
So, Megan, you've always been an illustrator, author? There was no accountancy, law career, anything like that?
Well, actually, I would say I'm an accidental author in many ways. I did grow up, I did a fine art degree when I left school. And when I finished that, I just wanted to be in the real world for a while. The only other thing that I liked besides art was books. So I went and worked for Penguin for 7 years in their sales. So definitely not the creative side of the industry, but it was really helpful because I really understood what happens when the books hit the shelves or hit the market. I think that's been really good background information. I did that. Then I went and did a teaching degree on top and English literature so that I could be an English and art teacher. Presumably that was where I was headed. I didn't really do a lot of teaching. I ended up working for Ed Queensland doing a refugee background education. So we were looking after prep to year 12 African families who had moved here. That sort of became a bit of a social work job, really. And it was quite all encompassing. So when I was pregnant with my second child, I thought, I'm just going to stay home and enjoy it. And it was really reading to my children night after night that I remembered the childhood dream of being a picture book illustrator and writer. And I thought, that's right. That's what I wanted to do. So it took me a while It took me a while to remember, but it was in those moments. And so I decided that I would like to illustrate. I didn't feel confident in the writing, and I started going to publishing conferences just to understand a little bit more about the creative side of the industry. And it was during one of those they had crafting a storyboard for a picture book session that I had signed up for. And it was in that session doing some little doodles and diagrams that the first book that I wrote and illustrated came to me. And it came to me like quite solid. I knew the title and I knew exactly what I wanted to talk about. And so that was a patch from scratch that ended up getting published by Penguin, which was fantastic. And it really was a story only I could write, which is why I thought, okay, I'm not just going to be able to illustrate. I'm going to have to write this story.
I see what you mean. Yes.
Yeah. So that's the accidental bit, I would say. Yeah.
So is your audience children, or is your style kind of whimsical, childish butterfly? Tell me about who your audience is.
Yeah, well, I probably originally would have said my audience was me and my family. Yeah. But things just unfold, don't they? In my experience of the creative path, I never really know what I'm doing before I do it, and it's only in retrospect I understand more what's happening. But since I've been in the industry now for 12 years or more, I would probably say that what the genre I'm writing in really, or mostly interested in, is narrative nonfiction. So you have nonfiction and then weaving a narrative through that. So I think that my audience is children and families, grandparents. I think my audience is anyone, actually. And I think one of the things I love is looking at picture books that have been made from adult books, because I can get the kernel and the nutshell of whoever's big grand idea in 10 minutes flat. So some famous adult authors have done picture book versions of their books, and I really love seeking them out, because I think that a picture book is a little bit like poetry. It's distilled, so it's quite sophisticated. People think it's really simple and easy to write a picture book, but it's actually a very distilled poetic form, and it's actually not easy, I don't think, to do well. Yeah.
Spill the beans then, Megan. What if you... I can see what you mean. If you've got some text and you need to bring that to life with pictures, whatever picture you create is going to strongly affect the way somebody reads those words. And I think you mentioned that it's not a case of trying to paint what the words say; it complements it. Still, means that what are the guidelines for creating illustrations to go with words? How do you write that visual poetry? Usually
the text would come first and the storyboarding would follow. So if I'm working with another author, that tends to, the publisher will contact me about the text first, ask me if I'm interested. I'll have a look at that. Normally what I would do is read. If I've decided I'm going to go ahead with it, or even when I'm still thinking about it, I will do little drawings or diagrams or doodles in the margins as it occurs to me. So I think what's fascinating for me is that we all basically walk around with a little movie camera inside our heads our whole lives. So when I'm reading a manuscript, I'm also watching the little movie in my head. And sometimes, that very first idea will actually be the best one. So I really want to make sure I get that early doodle down, even if I don't use it.
But there's so many things you've said there that I want to explore, like doodle down, but also the drawing in the margins, because a lot of people take notes in the margins, but you also, it's just sort of like artistic life in the margins. But you also said something about that movie camera, and it just takes me to something that you said on your website, the bottom of your workshops page, where you say we are all explorers of our worlds. The more closely we pay attention to life and our surroundings, the more finely tuned our senses become. In turn, our lives grow richer, and we are better able to contribute to others and to the natural world. You have a great little drawing of an explorer, but there's three things that are linked to art, science, and story. So can you just unpack that a little bit for us? I just think we talk a lot about curiosity in this show. This is a really completely different take, the way that you've phrased that and illustrated it.
Yeah, I'm super interested, and I think I always was, but I've been able to articulate it later on the journey. So the first book I wrote, called The Patch from Scratch, which you know about, was based on the experiences of my family. So my children, I think the youngest one was going to family daycare, and they had the hatchlings program come in, where they bring in the eggs and put them under a warm light, and the chickens hatch. But what you don't know at the time anyway is that once the chickens have hatched, the program moves on, and what to do with all the chickens. So I say that I went to pick up 2 boys one afternoon, and I came back with 2 boys and 6 chickens. So the kids weren't going to let me leave that program without taken home the chickens. And we had absolutely no idea. I mean, I'd had dogs growing up. That was it. You know, I had no idea how to look after a chicken. So we got a cardboard box. We got some ripped up newspaper. I quickly Googled, what do they eat? We went and got that from a local produce store. We figured they probably need air and water, like most things, and just put it in the laundry, you know, so that they can get out overnight. And it really was, okay, now what? So it was just fascinating. Anyway, so we were looking after these chickens, and in the meantime, or previously, I had been planting native plants indigenous to this area around the boundary of my property. Because part of me actually would love to live in the country, really. And so I thought, well, if I can't get out there, I'm going to bring it to me. And I was interested in ecology. I would have got that from my mother, I would say. She was very interested in gardening and ecology. And so I planted all these native plants around the perimeter. And then we had these chickens, and then they started doing chicken poo, as they do. And I knew that was really good for the soil. So I said to my mum one day, okay, what am I going to do with all this chicken poo? You know, it's good fertilizer. And she said, yeah, it's really good fertilizer, but don't put it around your natives. It's too high in phosphorus or potassium or something.
Okay.
Yes, our native, because we don't have that in our soil, or even nitrogen might be too high in nitrogen. Because we don't have a lot of that in Australian soil, Australian plants have adapted to take it up really well. So if you put too much around, it'll kill the plant. So I was like, well, what am I going to do with it? And she said, oh, it's really good for veggies. And her grandmother had been a veggie gardener in the country. You know, over the war years, no money, no shops. They had to grow their own food. So so one weekend we made some garden beds. The kids mucked in and helped, kind of, sort of. They were toddlers, and I laid down this chicken poo and mixed it up with the soil. The kids and I would just come out and see what was going on. I did buy some seedlings with the kids, but we found, because it was this composted chicken poo soil, and we used to give all our scraps to the soil, to the chickens, all these things just started, it was like the Garden of Eden, you know, it started everywhere. And it was amazing, because I realised I really don't know, I'd never seen what broccoli looks like off the plant.
Wow.
Yeah, I'd never seen what carrots look like, or, you know, some food I had seen before, but really it was a total revelation just how that all came to be. And I think the idea of all of our scraps, all of our kitchen scraps went to the chickens. They would eat whatever they wanted to. They'd shred everything else very efficiently. So you had compost really fast. Then that would go into the veggie patch. Then that would just spontaneously start sprouting all this food, which we would then eat, plus the chicken eggs. And then that would all go back to the chicken coop, and they would go through. So I was absolutely fascinated by how things grow, the interrelationship between the different elements, how our waste just went from whatever to virtually nothing, because it was all going out to this, and that our waste actually became something really precious, which was very, very good quality soil. So
I'm just, your tone of voice reveals how passionate you are about nature. And it's a theme that Paul and I have explored with many creatives. So I just want to learn more about its role in relation to your art. My question is nature about delivering a state of mind? Just being in nature relaxes you, brings out creativity in general? Or is it directly impacting what you paint and draw? Is it, I see something in the veggie patch to like it? How does nature affect your art, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, well, I think, so initially, you know, this is that book here, which Paul would know about. So initially, I guess I was illustrating, I think what I was illustrating in this book and most interested in is conveying just how complex and interrelated and interconnected everything is on the planet. And that's what I learned to see in my own little veggie patch. I saw how the seasons affected what was happening, how they changed growth patterns, what they grew, etc. So I think through this, it almost was like I was using art, but I was exploring science, and I was just spontaneously bringing it all together in this one. But it got me really interested. So I would say what I love now, and I do a lot of workshops in schools, which I call STEAM workshops. So it's science, technology, English, art, maths, music. What I want to show is what I learned, which was when I was at school, you would learn maths, then you go to English, then you go to art, then maybe you do some poetry, whatever. It wasn't until I experienced this that I realized there's no lines between these things. I get that. Obviously, then as an adult, I'm like, oh, okay, so they taught us all those things separately because you can't teach everything all at once. But I don't think that ever got told to me that in the real world there aren't divisions like that. And when I saw this, I went, there are no divisions, and all of these things inform everything else. And so I think I found that totally fascinating for myself. So I teach that a lot because I think, for me anyway, that creativity comes when you look at all these disciplines and you play between them. So why can't science influence or be artistic? And I listened years ago to, I think she passed away young, which is a bit sad, but her name was Miriam Mazani. She was the first she's the first woman, I think, to win the Nobel Prize for Maths. In 2014, I think, and she was being interviewed and obviously winning a Nobel Prize in maths, and she's at Princeton University or something like that. Her understanding of maths was much, much deeper than most people. And I've always been terrible at maths, but I've always said, I'm sure somewhere maths and art connect. I just don't understand how. And I wouldn't say I super understand it now, but when I listened to her talk, I thought she's talking about maths like I would talk about art. Like the place that she was in herself and how she was looking at maths, I thought that is exactly what an artist is doing. And so I think that when our brains can jump between these different areas, whether it's, engineering to the structure of a tree, or the way she spoke about maths in such artistic forms, in such an artistic way where she didn't really know where it was going. She just kind of was following the lead of maths, I suppose, like an artist would do. Science informing poetry. I don't know. I just think that there's no lines and there's no just division. And that's what I think is really where, for me, creativity can spark. For anyone, you don't have to be an artist. That's just one of the things to me.
Yeah, I love that, Megan. And there's a quote that I've been trotting at every chance I have lately that comes from a book called How to Live an Artful Life by Katie Hessel. And she also wrote The World of Art Without Men. So it's mostly women. It's a page a day. But it was actually Nick Willings who was talking about his mother, Paula Reggio. And she said that basically an artist is a person that goes to a place that we've never been and brings back something we've never seen, but that we instantly recognize. Listening to you talk about, that blending of, all those sciences and art and English. And I think that's, it obviously applies not just to art, but also to creativity as a general, but also, it becomes the scientific discovery, I didn't know that about gravity. Yeah. That makes sense, without sort of, so I think it's really interesting that you, have focused on this broad continuum. Now, you said before you like narrative nonfiction, illustrated narrative nonfiction for anyone. But so have you explored these stories or this sort of theme about Inconnected in any of your own works again?
So I feel like even in my art practice, I'm doing that. So I live at Manly, on the edge of Brisbane here, near the waterfront, and in Wynnum North they have a mangrove boardwalk that goes out over the bay, and I absolutely love the mangrove forest. To me, it's this enchanted forest, the forms of the trunks all weaving in and out of each other due to, I guess, the weather conditions, etc. and all the life that sustains. So you'd see little crabs in there, lots of different birds come along. The dugongs, I've seen dugongs there coming to eat the seeds. Wow. Pelicans, fungus, whatever, and just how it changes so dramatically between the different tides, because it's mangroves, it's right on the edge there of the tides, and then it looks out over the bay to the islands in the distance. And I think I just find it the most enchanting looking place, I guess, but then the more time I've spent there, the more interrelated I've seen things being. So in that series on the mangroves, I still think it's the same thing that's fascinating me, that I'm wanting to hang around, I guess, while I paint, which is just like that it's art, but it's sort of art and it's everything at the same time. It's ecology, it's how do things interconnect, it's physics, it's biology, it's the beautiful forms of the trees that are sort of winding together because of the coastal winds, I guess, make them look like they're all walking off in a certain direction. So I think even in my art, that's what's intriguing me the most. And I've just been working on a book that follows on from A Patch from Scratch. And it's, again, the same idea, like how can we relate to the natural environment even if we're in an urban setting? Can we not also have a really deep connection to nature? So that's what I'm interested in. We only have 400 squares. We're not on acreage, anything. But I think if you pay attention to your land, how the sun comes up and goes down, it's amazing what you can pack in. So the book I'm working on at the moment is about a frog pond in the same place with the same family. So whereas Patch from Scratch was looking at growing your own food, recycling your waste into food, etc., and watching this changing seasons, this one's more about, well, okay, once you've done that, how do you make your place hospitable to native species? How can we be environmentalists in our own backyard, literally, or along the street or wherever? So again, it's based on just what I'm doing in my life. So I created a pond to try and attract frogs, and I did eventually get some native striped marsh frogs. But I didn't just, as with the Patch from Scratch, I didn't just get that. I got dragonflies, the bright blue ones as well as the red ones, coming because they lay their eggs in water. Then I got, butcher birds who hang out over the top because they want to pick off some of my frogs and tadpoles and whatever. And as with the Patch from Scratch and the possums and everything that came along, I'm trying to learn how to share, like how do we live in harmony with that. So I'm always saying to the butcher birds, I don't mind if you take a few because you're lovely too, but can leave some for me, leave some for me. And now I've got a little green tree snake that's come along and worked out how to go along this little log to get to the little frog island that I put in the middle. So now I'm going to have to rearrange. Well, do I or don't I rearrange the little path that the snake's using so that I can save some of my frogs? I can quite work out, how much I want to play God in this space. But again, it's the same theme, really, I think, all over again. But this time the focus is on native species. And why can't we have it all? Why can't we live in the urban setting? And why can't every family or homeowner be part of creating environmental biodiversity? Obviously, I will be illustrating that, and there will be a lot of art involved in conveying the emotions. That some things it's best to do in the illustration, some things it's best to do in the text.
What I love about what you've just described, because behind an apparently simple, rather charming idea, build a frog pond, is a big idea. Why can't we live in harmony with nature? Why can't we sort of connect nature, even if in an urban setting? I think you've answered the question. My question was, imagine you have a passion, you have a big idea about nature, about science, whatever it might be. How do you turn that into a piece of art? And I think what you've said, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you reflect on what you personally are doing about it. And you thought, my answer isn't to kind of hold rallies and launch political movement, for example. My personal answer is to build a frog pond. And then that becomes the source for your art. Is that right? Did I get your thought processes correct?
Yes, I think I'm following. I'm following what draws me in this setting. I know that it's around that nature connection in my art, in my books, in my stories. So I feel like it's a real dance. I think it's a dance between me as an artist and what's happening around me. I think I think hopefully will come out through the action of actually doing what I'm doing, but also writing and illustrating about it. Say, for example, with Patch from Scratch, somebody I heard on the radio around that time, somebody coming out who on Radio National, I think they're being interviewed, and their work was involved in world food security. How do we secure food in each different country? The challenges are different. So they said, well, Australia is a very arid country in the centre, and all of the arable land happens around the edges of this country, which just also happens to be where you've put all your cities, obviously. Yeah. So what do we do about that? And he was saying, even if people just grew herbs on a balcony, it would make a mass. Every household did something like that. It would take a massive pressure off the food bowl in order to, and also you would be taking advantage of the fact that you're there in the cities, but you probably got better rainfall than the farm at the back anyway. So in that sense, what I wanted to convey that in the story, but it's quite complex. So trying to bring that into the story through the words and pictures is what the challenge is. That how can I turn all of that into one sentence? Say, for example, in Patch from Scratch, I'll just give you one more example. I was looking at how important everything is in ecology, and you can't just pick and choose and cherry pick the things you want and get rid of the things you don't. It upsets the whole system. It's not possible. So I had done extensive reading on that, but of course my audience is everyone, I like to think, but because I think the best picture books are for everybody, but you know the audience is also 4 to 8 year olds. How do I get them on board? It's not easy. So say, for example, this picture here is an example of that I'm just thinking of straight away. So you can see this is the garden at night. Can you see that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we're seeing two kids and an adult holding a torch at night looking at the vegetables.
So this is the garden at night, and they're out there because they've discovered something stealing their fruit and veggies. And so I'll just read you that little bit of text. We even go out on night patrol to take the slugs and caterpillars off the leaves and feed them to my chooks. Even after all our work, bugs still eat some of our veggies, but we're trying to share. If all the insects were gone, what would the birds eat? So that was me trying to distill pages and pages and lots of things that I had researched about that issue.
Megan, you're not going to believe this, but we're almost out of time. And you've distilled your message very well. It's absolutely been an absolutely fascinating journey. Look, we always ask our guests to give one final piece of advice to our audience. Now, I don't know for you whether it's about remembering what your passion is or it's more about, living more connected. Either, in the world or, with the things that you do. So whatever it is, one bit of advice to our audience around whatever.
Okay, all right. Well, I could say so many things, but I guess what I will say, just for today anyway, is that I think there's a strong connection between our bodies, our spirits, society, the natural world, the built world, and that our sense of belonging and well-being comes from being in harmony with nature, and that in turn can bring harmony between us and our world.
Fantastic.
Excellent. That was absolutely, we're almost spot on time. Again, it's been absolutely fantastic to speak to you. It's been so enlightening. It's always unusual where these conversations go. Yeah. I thought that we were going to be talking about watercolour. But it is great, and I certainly do know the Patch and Scratch, and I love the story arc of where you end up now. So thank you very much for sharing.
Well, I can't wait to read the books too, and share them. I have grandkids, so they might. I'm sure they'll enjoy them too. Megan, a huge pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a delight. Thank you very much.
Well, Chris, that was great. As I said, I didn't know where that was going to go, and I thought we were going to talk about watercolour techniques, but it was far from that.
I tell you what really struck me is, her work is beautiful, it's whimsical, it's a joy to see her illustrations and her work, but the fact that it's underpinned by this big idea about interconnectedness and challenging us to become more observant about what's around us and giving us tools to do something very quickly, very easily in our own area. And yet it doesn't sound pious, it doesn't sound like she's preaching to anyone. She's turning that idea into a joy. I was very struck by that.
Yeah, afterwards, she said, she's not you said campaigner, but she said, look, I'm not a protester.
Yeah.
I'm not into active resistance. And I made the comment that she's into active persistence.
Yes.
Yeah, so she is, as you say, she's a doer, and she certainly is a doer. She gets stuff done. And I really enjoyed it. It was a fabulous insight into many different things.
Yeah, and I think it gives us the inspiration that it's something we can all do to create, to connect, to shape our own lives. So yes, hopefully anyone listening to this has got some inspiration too out of this. And if you have, there's one thing we'd love you to do, and that's hit that follow button. Follow us so you get notified when new shows get broadcast. Follow us so you remember to tell your mates about the show and spread the word about creativity. Paul, what else can people do?
Yes, and look, they could always give 5 stars to Megan, not for Chris and I, 0 for Chris and I, and 5 for Megan, and leave a comment, and as Chris said, tell your friends. So please tune in next week for another exciting and interesting and curious explorations in creativity with Chris and Paul and a guest.
See you next week.